Good morning and welcome to the 27th meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee. Megan Gallagher, MSP, and Mark Griffin, MSP, are joining us online, and Fulton McGregor, MSP, will join us during the meeting. And the first item on the agenda is to decide whether to take items 3 and 4 in private. Are members agreed? We're agreed. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence from 2 panels of witnesses as part of our pre-budget scrutiny. And our first panel this morning, we're joined in the room by Councillor Katie Hagman, who's the resource spokesperson at COSLA, Jonathan Belford, who is the chair of the Directors of Finance section at the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, otherwise known as SIPFA, and Alan Russell, who is representing SOLACE, the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives. And we're joined online by Councillor Stephen Heddle, who's the Vice President of COSLA. Good morning. I welcome everyone to the meeting. We've got about 90 minutes for this discussion. There's no need for you to operate your microphones, and members, please direct your questions to specific witnesses to, Katie, shall we direct our questions directly to you initially, and then you can point it out, or Stephen, okay, and then you can direct them to others. And if you want to come in on a question, please indicate by, actually Stephen specifically, if you want to come in, please indicate by putting an R in the chat function. So we're now going to move to questions, and I'm going to start with a question kind of specifically in the area of the forthcoming budget. So something that's come up in our sessions so far has been the need for multi-year funding. And I asked that question, you may be aware of this, I asked that question of the First Minister during the convener group meeting with him a few weeks ago, where I did get assurances from him that that will be forthcoming. So I think that's a positive step. But I think something else that I've picked up in our sessions is the need for flexibility. So it's one thing to have the multi-year funding, but while there has been a move towards more flexibility, I have also heard that there are still concerns in that space. I'd be interested to hear from you what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me along today. I think, absolutely, it's a long-term ask and desire to have that multi-year settlement from Scottish Government in order to plan across local government. I think we are facing a range of really hard challenges, and those aren't getting any easier. And in order to address those challenges head on, we need to have that long-term vision. I think one of the points that we have been making for quite a time is we want to get into a space where we're looking at preventative spend, because that remains absolutely key. There's a lot of firefighting that we end up having to do because of that short-term funding model that we're on. And yeah, absolutely, again, it's part of the Verity House Agreement that there should be no ring fencing. We should have as much flexibility as possible. And that's really to reflect the fact that we have 32 local authorities who may want to deliver services that best meet the needs of their communities, because Scotland is it's quite a range of demographics, of areas, of economies, and each area is unique. So we need to have that flexibility to meet the demands. And the ambitions of eradicating poverty, for tackling the climate emergency, and moving towards net zero, these all take long-term plans, and the funding has to be there in order to deliver.
Thank you for that. And just on the, as we know, the Scottish Government's budget is going to be published in mid-January, and I'd be interested to get a sense of the time pressures that are going to be placed on local authorities because of that, but also the impacts on community and service user engagement.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and perhaps Jonathan's best to speak to in terms of the timeframes of that one. But, you know, clearly having that later budget, you know, we have to be able to set our council taxes by a certain date. Those notices have to go out. There's going to be some really difficult decisions that are going to have to be made. And without, again, that certainty, there's going to be a huge amount of pressure on staff to be able to, you know, even look at that long-term planning, etc. So, you know, it is going to be a challenge, but, you know, local government always meets those challenges head on. And, you know, we are in our communities, we're listening, and there's a range of consultations across Scotland that are happening currently. You know, the budget gaps that we're potentially facing are stark. So we are doing that homework now. But obviously with a later budget, that does bring its challenges. And certainly as resources spokesperson, I'm meeting with the Cabinet Secretary regularly. And, you know, those conversations about that long-term planning are happening.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks. Good morning. I would just add that I think the clarity that we get from the settlement is the final adjustment that's made to our budgets, the way in which we present that to our elected members as a sector. Therefore, the earlier they get that, absolutely, the more time we've got to work with those actual figures. It comes back to that certainty point about the multi-year that you were asking about first. And I think being able to understand what our actual position is and bringing certainty to our decision-making and financial planning is incredibly important. In terms of this year, with a budget being set in the middle of January, that's not to say that we're not doing things now. We are going, as a sector, I would be very confident to say that every council is already doing work around our budgets. We're probably, as I am in Aberdeen, looking at budget engagement starting in November around the choices and decisions that we potentially would need to make, but also gather in the information that we're looking for from the public and our citizens about how changes that we might have to make impact on them. So all of that work is actually happening. Every council will have a 5-year medium-term financial strategy in place, and therefore there's a sense of understanding of what next year might look like. And as I say, it'll be that refinement in January that will have to be squeezed into the decision-making, literally within an 8-week period. I would imagine that every council is considering how they do that. And certainly we've heard that 1 or 2 councils have already changed budget setting dates in order to move those back slightly in order to accommodate the work that they feel needs to be done. But absolutely, getting a multi-year deal, going back to that point about the certainty that brings, the ability to, I suppose, engage meaningfully across a period rather than just for the next year and the year that's ahead is one of those key points. I'll stop there.
So it sounds like that proactive work also is useful in terms of discussions for COSLA with the Scottish Government as the budget process is being negotiated. So it sounds to me like the mid-January kind of full stop is not the starting point. It's the end point to the process beginning.
Absolutely, I would agree that it is the end point.
If you want to hang on a minute while I can't hear you because I'm not quite sure what's going on there. The blinds are going up. For those at home watching, the blinds are going up and down, and they're making a lot of noise in the room. So, but we have to have the blinds down because there's so much wonderful sunlight that it's hard for broadcast to. It affects the lighting for broadcast. Anyway, sorry, Jonathan, please continue.
Very much the end point, and I suppose the end point in a process that's continuous throughout the year. We're not pretending that this is something that we started at a particular moment in time and just due to a council meeting that will end somewhere towards the end of February or the beginning of March. This is something that now happens throughout the year, and I think taking the opportunity, if we're to get it in terms of multi-year and understanding that, I think that will help enormously going forward.
Good, thanks. Alan, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Just add briefly to what Jonathan's covered there. I mean, I think the move to multi-year settlements would be a very significant step forward. I think every local authority will be planning, as Jonathan says, over a medium-term basis, and taking a view, prior to multi-year settlements of what the expectations are likely to be, and that informs engagement with local communities. But having multi-year budgets provides that added degree of certainty. Another thing I would say is that in terms of delivering change, transformation and savings, these take a number of it's complex programmes to deliver of change, and having to engage with local communities takes time to do that well. So I think the provision of multi-year budgeting and multi-year settlements provides an opportunity to do that from a more informed basis, and helps close down one of the major uncertainties that's had to be managed over a long period of time. So it would represent a big step forward. As Jonathan says, the settlement date for this year obviously compresses that budget setting cycle, which makes that final part of the process in terms of setting the budget for the forthcoming year more challenging. But I think in terms of engagement with our communities, that will have been ongoing for some time.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm going to move on, staying within the kind of budget space, and I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher, who's got a number of questions, and she's joining us online.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to our panel. I'm very interested to hear the panel's views this morning on local authorities being able to increase council tax next year as they see fit. Last year, certainly in the budget 2025-2026 for local government, we saw some stark increases. Falkirk Council increasing their council tax by 15.6% being one of those examples. So I'm really interested to hear their views on council tax increases, but as well the impact that it'll have on hard-working taxpayer individuals and families as well, and what consequences there could be to increasing council tax and the impact that it could have on individuals in the community.
Katie, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start there. So I think, first of all, across Scotland, local government leaders have been very, very clear that council tax must be able to be set locally. That's a local decision that has to remain with local government. And certainly throughout all our lobbying that I think we've ever done, we've always said that there should be no council tax freeze and there should be no council tax cap. So, that we're yet to launch our budget lobbying position, but I can pretty much guarantee that position is not going to change going forward. I think, yes, last year the figures appeared to be quite stark, and certainly, there was a lot of concern in the media raised on that. But I think it's really important to remember that those on the lowest income, those that are struggling, there is a huge range of support available for individuals, for families, and councils are there to help and support. So alongside this is, the reviewing council tax and the consultation that has just been launched jointly with Scottish Government is a really positive step. And, I'm delighted to have been working with the Cabinet Minister on taking that work forward. The consultation has gone live because, we want to ensure that our council tax is fair, that it's based on, a solid tax base, and there's a huge amount of work to be done. So, appreciate it's maybe not gone as fast as we might like. And I'm sure there's frustrations across Parliament where I've met with all the political parties where I've had discussions on council tax reform, but that work has commenced, so that's really positive. But back to your original question of where should council tax decisions be made? Absolutely at the local level is our very clear response to that. And as I say, anybody who may be struggling, we will support individuals, we will support families in ensuring that nobody is left in a really difficult or challenging position.
Okay, thanks. Megan, before you come in again, Stephen has indicated he wants to come in, and also Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Just additional to what Katie's been saying. It's absolutely essential that local authorities should have the flexibility to set the council tax that they need to set. None of our local authorities likes to set a high council tax, but the necessity to set a high council tax will be driven by how the multi-year budget matches our expectations. Because if we have a budget that falls short, we will, through necessity, need to raise additional money through council tax and indeed charging. The impact on council taxpayers is a point that's well made, and one that sort of weighs heavily on every councillor has to set the council tax. Katie's mentioned that looking at a reformed council tax, we want it to be fairer and more progressive, and that's going to obviously have a beneficial effect for those on the lower incomes, and the impact of the council tax will have to pay out of these low incomes. But for those on the lowest incomes, it's largely mitigated by the council tax reduction scheme, which would mean that in the most extreme cases, they pay no council tax, though they will, of course, pay water rates, which are not exempt from that. And I think when we look at the increase in council taxes last year, this has to be seen in the context of many years of council tax freeze, which we estimate has left a cumulative shortfall of probably about £700 million in council budgets, which otherwise we would have had if the council tax had trended up at the same rate as it had been before. And it also has to be seen in the context of last year, when there was significant wage rises, there was the impact of employers' national insurance contributions, and the devastating impact of high energy prices, all of which are probably identical to the calculations that would factor in setting our budgets the previous year.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan.
Thank you. And not to repeat what Councillor Heddle and Councillor Hagman have just said, just to emphasise just how much of an important aspect council tax is for local authorities in terms of how much it raises, the billions that are actually brought into the overall budget associated with that. It's the largest financial lever that each local authority has got, and therefore it's fundamental to the financial sustainability of each individual council, recognising that the costs, where are those? I suppose where is the funding to support rising costs, which we've seen progress significantly over the last decade, and certainly the last 5 years. And I think if the two things are not moving in parallel, if there isn't the opportunity to shift council tax, then you're ignoring the fact that part of the budget's therefore unsustainable. It needs an income that's coming in order to actually support the whole of the budget that's being presented. Therefore, there needs to be an element of increase coming from Scottish Government in terms of the grant funding, but also that flexibility. And it's important to note that when we put options in front of our elected members to make those choices locally, we're doing that on the basis that very few decisions are very easy. These are all being set against each other, if you like, and actually managing the situation of how do you choose which is the right one to take is one that obviously our politicians do, but actually it's set and considered very carefully alongside all the impact assessments, for example, that are done as part of that budget setting process.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, very briefly, Alan, and then we've got a lot of questions, but come on in, and then I'm going to come back to Megan because she's got a few more questions for you.
Just really quickly to say, obviously, council tax, as Johnson touched on, is part of the funding arrangements for local government, but it's not just about balancing the budget; it's about maintaining the support that every council has to supporting those most vulnerable in our communities, tackling inequality within our communities. And every council will have their own arrangements and focus for that beyond core services. I know certainly in Renfrewshire we've had a long programme of tackling poverty programme, alcohol and drugs programme, and our Fairer Renfrewshire programme. the council tax has been critical to generate local resources to direct additional support to the most vulnerable within our communities, and also supporting major economic regeneration investments that are about growing the economy and creating opportunities for all and inclusive growth. So I think it's important to recognise it's not just about balancing budgets, but it's about being able to tackle and direct to support local priorities as well.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that. That was a very good point, and good to hear the illustrations in your own local authority. Megan, back to you.
Thank you, Convener. I've been listening with interest in relation to the answers given this far, but I don't believe that it's fair to ask council taxpayers to plug gaps in local authority budgets, particularly at a time where they're seeing their council tax increase, but the level of public services decrease, and they're seeing a lot of cuts within their communities. And of course, that's causing a lot of unrest within our communities as well. And I'll get on to a question regarding that in a second. We've heard a lot as well this morning in relation to details of the discussions between COSLA and the Scottish Government, and I'm pleased to see that those discussions are progressing. But two issues that the councils are going to have to grapple with over the next few months as they prepare their budgets, and that's meeting pay demands of workers, but also dissatisfaction of council services. And we've heard Unison at a previous committee meeting state that the growing dissatisfaction is dangerous. So I would be interested to hear the panel's view on all of this in the round, given that there's a reduced level of trust in local government, and the number of complaints in relation to council services have increased by over 21% in the last year.
Okay.
I'm happy to kick off with that one. So no, thank you for those questions. I think first of all, in terms of the pay demands on our workforce, local government is there at the front line of a huge range of services, and our staff are absolutely incredible. I will defend our local government workforce at every opportunity, and they absolutely deserve fair pay and good pay for the work that they do. So we will always ensure that we pay fair wages, and we are signed up as Fair Work employers as well. That obviously does bring demands on our budgets, because we want to be able to offer pay increases that can keep up with inflation, etc. And, you know, it's really great that we've managed to secure a 2-year pay deal within the SJC workforce, and that's a really positive step, because, again, that allows us a little bit extra planning. It allows us a bit of breathing space to look at the range of issues across our workforce, because it's not just about pay, it's about terms and conditions, and there's a range of conversations that are happening right now. You know, we are still committed to be looking at the £15 an hour, but that comes with its challenges, and you know, that needs to be funded. And that needs to be funded from central government, but also we lobby the UK government as well, because you know we're not in isolation here, and we're acutely aware that you know the Scottish government is constrained by the budgets coming from the UK government. So I think it's really important to put on record that COSLA doesn't just lobby the Scottish government; we are lobbying ahead of the budget the UK government as well. In terms of the dissatisfaction, clearly, you know, that evidence is there. I would just maybe temper it slightly, and, you know, local authorities have made it much easier for our citizens, for our communities, to be able to voice their concerns. We have a lot more engagement across our communities, I think, than ever before. So while I'm not saying that it's just more people are reporting and it's not changed, I think we do need to be mindful of that. And across local councils, you know, elected members are getting the snapshot of, well, where are our complaints coming in? Are they resolved at stage 1? Do they go to stage 2? And there's huge amounts of learning that we do. But, you know, clearly as budgets are constraints, we are having to make really difficult decisions. And I think the fact that our services, the services we provide, it's been described as deeply human, you know, and humans are looking for the very best outcomes, and we're desperately wanting to deliver those outcomes. But, you know, as has been said previously, really challenging and difficult decisions have to be made, and we have to look at, well, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve here? So, you know, I'm not going to say that, you know, everything is absolutely fine and the complaints don't exist. Of course they do, but we will listen to them and make constant improvements, because that's what we do every single day anyway.
Okay. Anybody else want to come in on that? Alan.
Just, just briefly, I mean, I think as Councillor Hagman touched on, I mean, I think the other key aspect for me to recognise is that our communities and families within our communities are under greater pressure as well individually, and they're looking to rely on many council services to a greater extent. So there is a greater demand on a wide range of council services. But as Councillor Hagman says, there will be aspects of that where there's pressure in the system, not just in councils but across public service, and I think that's reflected in some of the challenges and complaints where people are seeking more support. I think what's important is how quickly councils respond to that. They are seen to respond to it, and they continue to engage well with their communities in relation to not just how services are delivered now, but how they're changed in the future. And also, I think importantly, how well councils work with their communities to develop and change provision, and actually work with their communities in relation to support those within their communities. Sometimes local government's not the best vehicle to do that, and actually working with their communities to help them to deliver support across their own communities is often the best way. So, it is challenging, but I think what's important is how local government reacts and responds and works with their communities to resolve and move that forward.
Okay, thanks for that. And Stephen, you indicated you want to come in.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Megan, for the question. It's an excellent question, and it touches on a lot of kind of key points, because in local government, we've seen our workforce cost increase by 26% since 2014, and despite our workforce actually declining by 11% over approximately the same period. And that despite a large increase in workforce due to taking on the early years commitments. So yeah, clearly it's a key pressure on us in aligning our budgets and deciding what services we can provide. And I think it's important to note what the Accounts Commission says around this, that councils have generally been effective in identifying and delivering efficiency savings at the same time as largely maintaining how services are performing. But this is getting more difficult. In terms of the decline in trust in local government and dissatisfaction with services, I mean, this is part of a decline in trust in democracy generally, which we can see due to the discourse, the lack of civility in the way that politics is conducted, and misinformation through social media. And local government has been found to be more trusted than the Scottish Government and the Westminster Government in that order. I think recognising the close connection with our communities and workplace. But I mean, I don't like to sugarcoat things. We have had to reduce services through necessity, and one of the fundamental points that we want to get across in all our budget lobbying and in terms of the pre-budget scrutiny is that we need a sustained investment in local government to allow the transformation to the preventative agenda that we feel will drive savings without compromising the quality of the services through redesigned services of a high standard.
Thanks very much for that. I mean, according to the Scottish Household Survey, so I hear the point that there's more engagement, but according to the Scottish Household Survey, people feel less empowered to influence decisions than 15 years ago. So there is, I mean, I think maybe Stephen, your point about the general decline in the trust in democracy, it comes back to something that came up for me when we were talking earlier on Megan's question around council tax increases. And I made a note here, do people really understand what their council tax is for? And so maybe there's something missing around that understanding of the general population. If they don't feel like they can influence decisions and they don't maybe understand what their council tax is for. I don't know if you have that sense, Katie.
Yeah. I'm happy just to come in on that, and I think that's one of the real positives about doing the council tax consultation, because actually we're able to explain, well, what is your council tax used for? And actually, although it brings in significant amount of funding to local government, it's actually only around 19% of our entire budgets as well. So, you know, it is an important discussion to be had, and certainly I've had the opportunity to feed in on the Scottish Government's tax advisory group, of which has been led by Shona Robinson, and certainly there's a lot of discussion of, well, how do you explain how the tax systems work so people have that real understanding. And you know, I'm very aware that sometimes people's council tax bills, if they're not written in a way that's really easy to understand, you know, that there's not that understanding real at a depth there. So, you know, there is work to be done with that. But, you know, as Stephen said, there is a wider narrative going on here. There absolutely is, and we cannot ignore that. And the amount of disinformation that gets put online with social media, that is damaging reputations. And, you know, whether that's based on facts is quite a challenging situation to be in. And of course, you know, it's very easy for misinformation and for sensational headlines to grab the attention, and then they just spread further.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Alan.
Just very briefly, just picking up the point, I suppose that this about complaints, a very one-dimensional view of satisfaction levels in certainly the household survey. And I think something probably most councils do, and certainly in Renfrewshire, we're just about to complete and report on our own household survey, because of concerns about the depth and robustness of the household survey at a local level. So completing a much deeper survey. And the results coming through that would indicate a much stronger level of satisfaction with many services across the board. And just picking up Councillor Heady's point, you know, probably a greater level of trust in council services, and probably importantly the council workforce, you know, within communities. So, you know, I think just picking up the point, you know, complaints, yes, important in terms of a measure, but it's a much more complex picture than that. And I think councils individually will have much richer information than even the household, the National Household Survey at a local level.
Okay.
So I think it's just important to
Thanks.
recognise that.
Yeah, so the need for more nuance then when we can uncover better information. We're going to move on, and we're going to start the theme of...
Yeah, sorry, I had one last...
Oh, right, apologies, Megan, come on in.
Thank you, convener. And it's just on the point that we've been discussing today in relation to, you know, lobbying the Scottish Government, lobbying UK Government. But of course, council tax makes up roughly 15 to 20% of councils' overall budgets. So does the panel believe that this year's budget could see a reduction in services once more, moving perhaps to statutory services instead of actually growing the areas of need? And I'm looking at areas such as education, social care, environmental, the areas that people see direct cuts and impacts in their communities.
Katie?
We are aware of the projected budget gaps that we're facing. So, you know, we're really mindful of that. And Audit Scotland has published some really stark figures of where we're at. I think it is important to say that we are prioritising where we can. And certainly just, you know, looking at some figures since 2011, which I appreciate is quite some time away, but our adult social care budget has increased by 29%. So we are prioritising that sort of human level, so to speak. But in the same respect, culture and leisure budgets have decreased by about 26% over that same time. And it goes back to that initial question about multi-year funding and getting into that preventative spend, you know, by not investing in leisure and culture and the well-being of our communities that is leaving us vulnerable as a society, and as local government we are stepping up and we are providing the adult social care services, but we are having to look where best to target, and it does come down to those outcomes that we're committed to, and eradicating poverty, especially around child poverty, is a key area for both the Scottish Government and for local government.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I am going to move on to the transformation piece, but if there's anything else you want to tuck into these other questions coming in, please do that. We're going to stay online, and Mark Griffin has a number of questions.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. I just wonder quickly if I can just ask, we talk about the transformation agenda, but we come to Councillor Hagman first, and just ask what she understands by that. What is the transformation agenda in local government?
Well, I think it's fair to say that across local government we have already been transforming our services. Local government today looks very different to what it did 10 years ago, and we have had to adapt. We've had to look at how do we deliver, the services that our communities expect and demand and should be entitled to with fewer resources. Where possible, we will work across local authority areas. We are looking at ways of shared development, shared working. The digital opportunities are there for grasping, and certainly I'm really delighted that later on, I'm just checking what month, no, it's next month. Next month, I'm going to be launching the refresh of the digital strategy with Ivan McKee. So, there's huge opportunities within the digital sphere as well. So there has been a huge amount of work going on, and I know Solace has been very involved in, the transformation and the councils of the future, etc. But, it's an ongoing piece of work, but it's not to say we haven't already started that journey.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Alan, do you want to come in on transformation?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, just to echo what Councillor Hagman was saying, from 2011, it is a long period, but I think it's important to recognise the scale of change that councils have delivered over that period of time. For Renfrewshire, will not be untypical of every local authority. We've saved £190 million over that period. Our current budget's about 550. Extrapolating that up for Scotland, it's going to be about £6 billion of savings by local government against a £16 billion spend. So delivering that level of savings is significant, and you don't do that without a lot of transformation. So councils have got a strong track record of delivering redesigning services, making best use of digital and technology solutions, rationalising assets across our estates, collaborating, delivering shared service opportunities, as well as streamlining our organisations and reducing bureaucracy across organisations. So there's a long track record of delivering change and transformation at scale. I think it was touched on earlier. That becomes more difficult. There's no doubt about that. It becomes more difficult moving forward. But there will be new opportunities. AI obviously is an area of developing opportunities, and councils, including my own, are actively progressing in that space. So, there will be opportunities to continue to transform, but it does undoubtedly get more difficult. And I think, as was touched on earlier, throughout that period, areas, education, social care have been heavily protected. In terms of policy decisions, a lot of that savings delivery has been, shouldered by those other services. So you can't deliver that level of savings without significant change and transformation as organisations, and how we operate and how we work with our communities. So, but it does get more difficult moving forward. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Coming back to you.
Yeah, to come back to Councillor Hagman again. You talked about relaunching that digital strategy with Ivan McKee in the Scottish Government, so it leads on well to my second question, was about how the local government reform and transformation agenda sits within the wider public service reform agenda of the Scottish Government, whether that's done hand in hand, it's a kind of co-working and co-reform of the entire public service sphere, or whether local authorities are essentially doing it on their own as a result of being forced into that by budget cuts, or if this is something that is, proactively being worked on together with Scottish Government too.
Again, I'm really happy to come in and say that there has been collaboration with Scottish Government, and certainly there was an event just, I think, the tail end of last year, I think, that local government was invited to take part, and in fact Stephen Heddle was speaking at Ivan McKee's launch of that. So we were very much side by side with Scottish Government on there, and we have been welcomed round the table for that. Again, I had a meeting just last week with Ivan McKee looking at the workforce and the aspiration to reduce the workforce as part of the public sector reform. I think I'm quite happy to come in on that point specifically, and certainly the aspiration of 0.5% of reduction of workforce again across local government. We're really clear that we've already reduced our workforce significantly. If we take out the early years in childcare, the workforce has reduced significantly, and our ask is very clear within that space that when we're looking at that 0.05% reduction of staff, it cannot include local government staff within that. One of the few areas that we could potentially reduce staffing would be across education and teachers, but that goes directly against the aspiration of maintaining teacher numbers. So without having that flexibility, we just simply wouldn't be able to go there. And in fact, our local government teaching workforce is worth around £4 billion in terms of wages, etc. And again, we're already doing this. We have been doing this for some significant time. So if we look at Q2 from 2024 to Q2 of 2025, our workforce has already reduced by 0.7%. So this is work that we've already done. But just to offer that reassurance to the committee, there is joint work going on there. And without speaking too much, I don't know whether Stephen wants to come in just to talk about the fact that he was on the panel and speaking and launching that public sector reform work as well.
Stephen, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you. That was a very interesting day, the launch of the work towards the public sector reform strategy, and certainly we very much welcomed Mr McKee's invitation to local government to sit alongside him and apply our context to what reform should be. I mean, we're clear that the public sector reform strategy is a Scottish Government document and necessarily has a Scottish Government-led focus on public bodies and how they can or should be reformed. But we're very keen to support this work alongside the Scottish Government, for we see that the public sector is something that needs to be viewed in its totality. Clearly, we have a focus on our own part of it, our own large part of it, and we're keen to make the point that the local government, in a way, is an exemplar of bodies working together across a wide range of services and across a range of geographies where it makes sense to find efficiencies. And we would be keen to embrace our public sector partners more in doing some of this work. And this is something, obviously, we will always pursue in the context of community planning. So, as we look ahead, and we have a very proactive view towards reform in our own context, we have our innovating and developing transforming special interest group, which looks at that and is comprised of the senior officers in COSLA and all the political group leaders that meet at COSLA. So it's a high-powered group necessarily to ensure it has the buy-in across all parties to change the agenda. But also, we're looking with our partners in the Improvement Service and Solace at the work that they're doing, which has been endorsed by the Accounts Commission as highly important. That addresses maybe some of the more specific strands of what we can do, including digital. But, you know, it's within the kind of policy context that's important to us, such as the Fairer Scotland duty. And, you know, perhaps finally realising the ambitions of CRERA as we go forward.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Mark, back to you.
Yep, thanks, Fiona. Just one final question on, you know, an area of significant transformation that's happened already when it comes to integrated joint boards. Now, my understanding as the principle of that is it was supposed to allow moving and sharing of resources between health boards and councils, and it was a spent to save initiative to reduce delayed discharge and keep people healthy at home. But the spend to save initiative seems to be that councils spend and health boards save. That seems to be my impression and my understanding from councillors in my area, and I just wonder if there's any interpretation of how integrated joint boards and that significant piece of transformation, you know, has that worked? Has it planned? Has that allowed for resource flow between councils and NHS, but more importantly in the opposite direction too?
Okay, Katie, yeah.
I mean, in terms of the actual finances of there, I think it's really stark. It is absolutely stark, and across Scotland, IJBs are struggling. There's for this year, the IJBs have forecast a £497 million pressure, and that's despite the pass-through from local government to the IJBs in terms of the funding made available, plus an additional £109 million from partner bodies. I think the demand for services has never been greater, and that is a result of a range of issues. You know, we're still dealing with the impacts of COVID, but we have an ageing demographics. The pressures that we're being, you know, faced with locally are really, really difficult. And the fact that we haven't we've perhaps lost sight of some of that preventative agenda, which is why that firmly needs to be back on the agenda now, because that has been lost somewhat. So, you know, we are at that sort of firefighting stage. And, you know, as much as I said earlier that our budgets for adult social care has increased, and it absolutely has, it's not increased to the point that can meet the demand, because we're still struggling to meet that. So we're doing all we can. In terms of NHS, I'm not able to speak on behalf of the NHS and how they manage their budgets, but certainly from a local council point of view, we're there at the table, we're working in partnership to deliver. And, you know, it's really important that that integration does happen. You know, when we're looking at place planning, when we're looking at investing in our communities, it's about the whole community. It's about that holistic read across, and we need to make sure that services are there in the communities where people need them, including health provisions as well. So, you know, we're working really hard, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there's a huge financial pressure on our IJBs and across health and social care.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan.
And I think just looking at that demand, I'd start probably from the point of view, I'm not sure that it was ever a spend to save initiative in terms of the IJBs themselves. I see spending and demand rising at kind of exponential rates. It feels like cost rising in order to deliver those services across both the health and, dare I say, the social care and community-based services sector. I think there's an element of resource shift between the two. I see that locally in terms of funding coming through the health service and being resource transferred across as part of the arrangements, the direction that IJBs are actually giving back to the health board and to the local authority in terms of what they want done. I think the challenge is how do you do more of that in order to shift more to allow that prevention agenda that Councillor Hagman's just mentioned, in terms of those community-based services that stop people entering the health system at the, dare I say, the expensive end, and how do we do more of that in order to allow that, plus the added demand that's in the system, and unfortunately that needs additional funding. We've seen councils and health boards provide additional funding across the last number of years. I think it's got more acute during 25-26 financial year, as more councils and health boards have had to commit or recognise that there's going to be a year-end adjustment that's going to have to affect the spending patterns. Some of those adjustments and choices locally in Aberdeen, there was a choice as part of the budget to add beyond what the Scottish Government had included within the settlement. That was all passported across to the IJB, but we added over £4 million with the Health Board committing to almost £7 million as their share of that extra. And that was to prevent some of the more difficult, perhaps more challenging impacts on those who are accessing our services, and trying to make sure that actually we're mitigating the situations in the local communities that actually people don't have access to individual services. So trying to recognise that that funding was absolutely critical to make sure that spending can continue on our services, and that's the point that Alan had made earlier, in terms of making sure that we continue with those services and therefore choices are made. But I don't see a saving. We are obviously trying to transform services through that, find savings where we can, but it's now crystal clear that there's far less level of reserve within IJBs, if anything at all, that they are working very, very much hand to mouth in terms of the money that's being received from the two partners in the system, and therefore any excess or demand that's beyond their means is causing real problems, both for, I would say, councils and for health boards.
Okay, thanks. Just before I bring in Stephen, just going to point out for ourselves time management. Here we have asked about a third of our questions, but we're into about 2/3 of our time. So we've got about 40 minutes left. So I'm going to just make a request for more succinct responses. And please, Alan, indicate if you want to come in. I will try to bring everybody in, but yeah, if something's already been said, I mean, this hasn't been happening. I think everything you've said has been really important, but I just want to make sure that we're keeping to time as best we can. Stephen, come on in on the IJBs, and then then I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey with some more transformation questions.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Katie's quantified the pressure that's been identified, nearly £500 million, and that's despite all the monies that have come to local government, certainly being passed into the IJBs, plus the additional £109 million from the partner bodies, which is not just local government. So we can see that there's not enough money there. And indeed, in our recently launched manifesto for local government, we highlight the need for an additional £750 million investment in social care. And, this is for the reasons that Jonathan's essentially outlined about the unmet need, the increase in demand, and the need for prevention to help turn around this supertanker and allow us to actually, over time, reduce spend. I think in Mark's question there was maybe an implicit question around, well, what's the point of IJBs? Have they succeeded? I think it's clear that the working together and the planning together between health and local government is vastly improved. So I would say from that aspect, yes, IJBs have been a success, but the financial aspects of it are stark still.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. Billy, come on in.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning to everyone on the panel. Just to stick with the transformation agenda for a moment, if I may, and to ask you a straight question. Does transformation only occur when you face a budget pressure, or does it occur elsewhere? And could you give a couple of examples? Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do it as standard. Absolutely. I mean, yes, it would appear from the outset that we only start looking at transformation when there's budget cuts. But no, we're doing this all the time, and we don't stand still with transformation. In terms of examples, I mean, just even, and I will touch upon sort of the digital opportunities and the fact that, you know, we can put a lot of our online services online, so that does transform. We get quicker responses. People are being able to get immediate responses to their queries, etc. as well. So we absolutely do transform. And even just looking at education has transformed. COVID actually, you know, pushed a lot of transformation on, and there was a lot of, you know, positive learning that we could take from COVID. So it was learning from some of those lessons, and that wasn't about budget. That was actually about getting the best outcomes. But I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to talk too much. I don't know if anybody's got specific. Yeah.
Just really quickly. No, it's not. Transformation is about delivering savings and doing things you know, more efficiently, but it's also about delivering better outcomes, providing communities with more choice. So in terms of technology, in relation to customer services, for example, it gives people within their communities a wide choice about how they contact the council, when they contact them at a time that suits them, whether that's online or indeed technology that allows us to take phone calls at any time of the day or night. So it is about expanding choice and delivering better services, and I think it is important to recognise that. It's not about managing you know, declining budgets. That's a key part of our response to the financial challenge, but it is about delivering better services to our communities.
Good. The Accounts Commission keep telling us, though, the urgency of this. It's urgent to see more councils transforming quicker, better, and so on and so forth. Do you get a sense that that is uniformly happening across Scotland, that we are seeing a transformation in services around Scotland? And this morning, the Accounts Commission have reported in North Ayrshire, saying that despite facing a budget cut, their performances in innovation. In fact, I'll just read it out. North Ayrshire Council is an exemplar of how to do change and innovation well, and other councils can learn from what they're doing and how they're doing it. Do the councils get the time to share good practice that's happening around Scotland? Because we ask this very often over recent years. Do we get the chance to see good practice and emulate it or copy it or adapt it for other local authorities in the way that North Ayrshire seems to be highlighted in this morning's Accounts Commission report?
I'm going to bring in Stephen,
yes,
because he indicated he wants to come in on the earlier one, so we'll put him on the spot with this one. And come on in, Stephen.
Yeah, apologies if I drift into the previous question as well. I mean, the councils do look at transforming their services the whole time. I mean, we all love local government and want it to be better the whole time, and we can't understand why everybody doesn't love local government to the same extent that we do. But, you know, there's plenty of examples. I have a page full of examples, which I'm not going to read out, but they cover digital transformation, work done in councils and prevention, early intervention, service redesign and integration, property and asset transformation, shared service and collaboration. And the question was, can councils share this practice? Is everybody doing things in the same way? Well, not everybody's doing things in the same way, because that wouldn't reflect local priorities, and it would inherently mean that there was kind of unnecessary duplication. The point that's being made around sharing best practice is obviously important, and Alan is probably the best guy to ask about that in the context of the excellent work that's being done by Solace, looking ahead and on an ongoing basis. But there's a point every year when councils get a chance to celebrate all the work that's being done in their area. And that's the Coastal Excellence Awards, which we'll have at the Coastal Conference next month. And it shows absolutely fantastic examples from a varied range of councils and a varied range of services and initiatives every year, regardless of the funding pressures. So, you know, we're always looking to change, and we're always looking to learn from our colleagues.
Okay, Alan, come on in.
Just briefly, in relation to the Solace work in partnership with the Improvement Service in relation to a transformation programme, and just picking up your point about sharing best practice and understanding it's a big focus as part of that. part of that work stream, in particular, for example, in development of digital technology, in developing best practice in route maps for developing and adopting technology projects and advancement that individual councils or groups of councils have been progressing. So it's very much at the forefront of the thinking of Solace. You know, some of our smaller councils are challenged in relation to scale and tackling transformation. It's not easy to do transformation. It's complex and challenging, but absolutely sharing of best practice and opportunities. And, you know, we'd point to probably, you know, development of AI is something coming over the horizon that we're all actively looking at. And, you know, in that space, there's certainly opportunities where, you know, the development and adoption of AI can be easily, taken on board by other councils as, you know, Pathfinder councils develop that type of technology and how it can be more easily used and adopted across the sector.
Okay, thanks for that.
Jonathan wanted to come in briefly,
right,
and then you can go to your next question.
Just briefly, thank you. And I suppose the quote you read out was from an Audit Scotland Accounts Commission publication. In some respects, that's where that focal point of them producing those reports. When we look at the suite that are produced by auditors and Audit Scotland directly in respect of the work that's done in local government, there's a huge amount of data there that we undoubtedly have access to, and I think every time one of those is actually published, there's an opportunity for us as local authorities to see what others are doing and test whether or not that's something that we're looking at as well. So there is opportunity, and that's definitely taken advantage of. And I would say that the other opportunity is the professional networks that exist across local government in all the different sectors, and I suppose making sure that 32 local authority representatives are coming together. So from a finance point of view, there's that one, but there are many others that cover a whole range of different professions and skills across local government that allow those ideas and opportunities to be shared.
Thank you. Very encouraging, your response to that question. My other question was really about the fiscal framework and maybe specifically the funding formula, just to test whether there's an appetite to look at the funding formula. It's been an issue for many, many years, and I think everyone involved with it is scared to touch it and tamper with it in case they lose out. But one of the key component parts of that, in my view, is the impact that population change will have on the funding allocation given to a local authority, and authorities who are losing population will tend to lose money. In fact, if you drop 1,000 people in your local authority area, you can be facing losing up to £2 million, and that will be particularly felt in Dumfries and Galloway, I would imagine, Katie, and in fact felt in parts of Ayrshire where I'm from. Is there any appetite in COSLA to have a look at that in the next session of the Parliament to see if we can make it fairer? I know that there's a floor and a ceiling mechanism there, but by and large, if you lose population, you lose money, but your costs still remain the same to deliver that service to your local community. So does COSLA see that there's a need to have a look at that in coming years?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the fiscal framework, it's really positive that we have now got a published fiscal framework that was published on the 10th of October. I think it's fair to say that COSLA sees this as a first step. This is not a finished document, and certainly the assurance has been given from the Cabinet Secretary that, you know, this will be reviewed, and this is it's a joint venture, and there is that commitment to review regularly. I think the points you made there around a rules-based fiscal framework, this is what local government was looking for, and certainly that ask remains, and certainly I fully expect that when the new parliamentary term begins and with the next Scottish Government, that will continue to lobby for a rules-based framework. I think it's also fair to say that there were elements in the fiscal framework that local government were disappointed not to see. like the rules base, but I'm also aware that the Scottish Government didn't also get everything they wanted, so there was flexibility on both sides. And I think keeping that as a live document under regular review is really important. But a huge amount, I can't even begin to describe the amount of work that has gone into this from officials on both sides. And actually the understanding from both sides has been a huge learning opportunity. And actually it has aided discussions. And certainly when it comes to that pre-budget discussions and understanding of, where are we at a base level, there has been learning on both sides. So from that point of view, it's a really positive space, but it is by no means done at this point.
Okay, thanks. Everyone wants to come in on this one. I'm going to go Jonathan, Alan, and then Stephen.
I'll go briefly then. Yes, is it a topic of conversation around direct finance? Absolutely, it's a conversation that comes up. But what we recognise, and I suppose what we're part of, is settlement and distribution group arrangements, the working together between Scottish Government, COSLA and ourselves in terms of actually how funding, as it becomes available, is distributed. It's clear that there's a process for that. It's underpinned by data and so on. And of course, the settlement itself, as you mentioned, has got this floor arrangement in order to smooth out the changes. It kind of guides me away from, and I suppose we can get drawn into spreadsheet after spreadsheet, data set after data set in terms of how that looks. But the fact is, 1 to 32, Aberdeen City rest close to the bottom. It doesn't matter if I'm to get more money's coming out of somebody else, and so on. And how do we make that shift? And I think that's very difficult to actually achieve. Ultimately, more funding into the system, the quantum, making every local authority be in a position where they can actually respond to the demand and the cost pressures. And I suppose that rules-based element, when you take that to the highest level, recognising that for local government is vitally important, because in some respects that starts to challenge actually the resource shift that potentially has to happen from other parts of the public sector in order to allow that funding to come into local government, dare I say, to allow us to compare the opportunities that exist between the priorities for one national priority or policy area, to recognise the benefits that perhaps can be added by local government receiving that funding instead.
Alan.
Try and be really brief. Yeah, I would agree with Jonathan. I think focusing on distribution would be a distraction, actually, and we do need to, I suppose, efforts would be better placed on looking at the quantum, and not just the quantum for the quantum's sake. I think about recognising the need to invest in those preventative areas. Recognising the commitments and principles established in the population health framework, for example, and about how those areas of service across the whole system in the public sector in Scotland, resources are able to shift more significantly strategically into those areas in order to help address to a greater extent inequalities across the country and reduce long-term demand, not just in council services but across our health function and other public bodies. That, for me, is where there would be much greater benefit for the focus to be on resource allocation and not on how the pie is distributed across local government individually.
Okay, thanks. Yep. He's waiting for his microphone.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you there. Yeah, Alan's beaten the pie. When we're talking about the fiscal framework and funding formula, as Wally introduced, it's important to make clear we're talking about two different funding formulas. In the context of the fiscal framework, we're talking about a funding formula that we don't have, which is a rules-based funding formula applied to the totality of the money that we get from the Scottish Government, the Barnett formula, if you will, which, yes, we are keen to have, because it would allow us to have a greater degree of certainty as to what's coming over the horizon. It will allow reassurance that if we were being squeezed, at least we're being squeezed as much as the rest of the public sector, and we weren't being used to balance the books. And the other funding formula is the local distribution, which is how the funding totality from the Scottish Government is split up amongst local government. And Alan's absolutely right. The problem with this is not how the pie is sliced, but it's about the size of the pie. The size of the pie, the quantum is not adequate at present to allow us to move ahead and do the transformation that we need to give us the certainty we're going to have preventative services that will ultimately deliver savings going forward. There's a good point made around population changes, and we are aware that there is perhaps issues highlighted by our councils where the populations are growing more so, that there's a lag between the population changing and the actual funding formula changing to follow that. And I think this is perhaps pointing at a need to know the population changes more quickly, because we're keen every year to operate the indicators to the best available information every year to make the distribution as fair as possible.
Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm now sticking with the same theme. I'm going to now bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Thank you for your questions and answers so far. There's no doubt that the transformation agenda has had a massive impact, and you have identified this morning about how that deals with choice, how that deals with outcomes, and how that gives better service. But the public perception is not that. The public perception is still that they seem to be paying more and getting less. So there's an imbalance when it comes to that. But I'd like to ask about the Invest to Save Fund. And specifically when it comes to the engagement that local authorities have had with the Scottish Government in the projects that were awarded and received some of that for, because the Scottish Government chose to ring-fence £6 million for local government. And it would be good to get a view from you as to how this supports genuine public sector reform. Who would like to take that first?
I think from my point of view, I'll maybe pass over to Jonathan as Director of Finance. But I think, you know, the Invest to Save, while welcome, it does go against the aspiration of moving away from small pots of funding. You know, allow local government that flexibility. Give us that money up front, and you know we will use it in the best way that we possibly can. And certainly when you're bidding into funding, that does at times take away resources. It takes away from our precious workforce that are looking to plan as well. But hopefully that's allowed Jonathan enough time to come with some of the responses and the specifics you asked there. Thank you.
Jonathan.
I think Councillor Hagman actually starts from absolutely the right point, that actually the necessity for councils to jump to small pots of money makes it very difficult for us to be sufficiently agile. Removing those small pots of money, providing it as part of our overall grant, would be much more successful in my view. We understand what funding is being provided for. There's an opportunity for us to continue to do things through receiving that funding, perhaps on a recurring basis would be ideal. But even on a one-off basis, what I would say is that the challenge that we had with Invest to Save Fund was about the timeline. The timeline to respond, to have something ready to go, to be able to respond in a very short period of time. And of course, that's the resource challenge. How do we have, to use the phrase, shovel-ready arrangements or shovel-ready opportunities that we can actually go and actually put a credible bid in that says, you know what, we're sufficiently advanced to get us to a point where we're going to spend the money in a very, very short period of time. can be really, really challenging, and that goes from capital works and bidding through capital opportunities through to things that perhaps are more revenue based or potentially capital in this particular space. But it makes local authorities really question whether or not they've got the resources to have that just in case resource set aside to allow that to happen. And I think that's what causes us most challenges, is how do we continue to do that to be able to respond positively when they become the opportunities. In an ideal world, we would rather have that as part of our settlements, that we understood what was actually coming to us and as part of the whole, rather than actually small pockets of money drip-fed, because sometimes they can be quite well into the financial year before they're actually announced.
Just really quickly, again, I just agree with what Jonathan's saying. I mean, for me, I touched on it earlier on, transformation is complex and can take a number of years to deliver. It can also be expensive, so there's a scale issue here, and I agree with Jonathan, having resources that are provided over, a multi-year settlement with flexibility to deploy locally is important. Try and put it in context, and again, Renfrewshire will be no different from other councils. Our transformation reserve fund to help support our own programme is about £8 million for covering the transformation programme over the next 3 years. So it gives you a sense of scale of £6 million in comparison, to the whole of Scotland. It's relatively minor level of funding. And as I said, transformation programmes and projects tend to run over a number of years. So it's complex and time consuming to deliver, which is why it needs to run at pace, but concurrently, so it is expensive to deliver.
My second question is about the council leaders and Unison themselves have talked about that efficiencies already have been achieved. And we're very well aware that that is the case amongst all councils, that efficiencies have been achieved. But they are suggesting within that there's a knock-on effect, that backroom services have been decreased, but that puts an added increased pressure onto frontline services, and that has a knock-on effect on workload and the timescales that staff are having to endure. And that has a knock-on effect when it comes to retention or the ability to ensure that you have the right people at the right place doing the services and improving all that for you. So it would be good to get a flavour of from you what you think of that. Are there definitely the concerns that efficiencies have already been made, but you're now getting to the stage that there's not much left to go, and that's having a knock-on effect when it comes to the staffing and the recruitment and the retention of your workforce to fulfil and manage the roles effectively under the current climates that you have when it comes to budget and reform and transformation?
I mean, I can kick off on that one if helpful. Workforce challenges are an issue, absolutely, and I think you've heard evidence from other sectors on this as well. And it is an ongoing challenge, the retention and recruitment of certain areas. I think I've spoken previously to this committee of the challenges across planning, for example. Social workers is another area. I think when it comes to workforce planning, there isn't any dedicated funding within local government for workforce planning, and that role is taken forward through HR, through back office staff, and certainly when we're looking to make savings, it's really challenging. Do you cut the frontline delivery services, or do you look to see how you can make those savings in back office? But actually the back office staff are really crucial into having that robust forward planning, forward thinking, and we're hugely reliant. I mean, Jonathan here is excellent at coming forward and explaining things in a really simple to understand way, but without our directors of finance who and the teams that sit underneath directors of finance that can actually explain the nuances, it's really, really important that we have have that good governance, that good advice, and then that we can translate it into an easy to understand narrative for the public. You know, and we go back to that very first point about council tax. So, you know, there's a huge amount there. We have made, you know, huge amounts of savings, and as I say, there is that commitment through public sector reform as well of how do we look at the workforce planning, but it remains a challenge, absolutely. And you know, we will work with our trade unions, and we work with, you know, colleagues across Scotland, and certainly with having the 2-year pay deal, which is excellent within certainly the SJC space. It allows us to get into that space of what are the issues, how are we going to tackle together in partnership with our trade unions the real challenges faced on the ground.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Someone calling in from Farfield. I'm going to actually bring in Evelyn Tweed because we've started to touch on workforce issues and she has a number of questions in that area.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. I think really my first question, Convener, has probably been answered, but I'll ask the second question that I have. Previous witnesses have discussed the opportunities and threats of digital skills in the local government workforce, including AI. And there was definitely a feeling from some witnesses that AI was actually going to be used to replace jobs. So there was a real anxiety about this. So what are your views on digital strategy, which you've touched on already? How can that be used to the good? And is AI friend or foe?
So as the digital lead within COSLA, this does fall within my remit. And as I said earlier, we are looking to relaunch the digital strategy. I think we have to look at it head on. And I think the comments there about opportunity or threat, I think we just need to be really mindful of that. We also need to be really careful about digital exclusion, and to ensure that nobody is left behind, and that includes within our communities, but it also includes our staff. So that does take investment within our workforce as well. Clearly, there is going to be concern from our trade union colleagues that, you know, this could mean a loss of frontline staff, you know, as digital transformation comes into place. And it's a really careful, and it needs to be managed really well. I think, you know, from a COSLA point of view, we've just set up a new special interest group looking at digital, and that is about that collaborative, bringing all the partners in, looking at that shared learning, where there are opportunities, and it allows us to have that discussion going forward. So I think it's a really positive point, and certainly with working with Scottish Government, the issue of digital exclusion is high up on the agenda, as well as AI. We need to make sure that as that advances, that we're not left behind, but also that those safeguards and those checks are put in place. So that is ongoing work that we will continue to do.
Again, I'll try and be brief. I think a couple of points to make. First of all, something like AI has been in existence for some time across many local authorities using advanced automation and robotics. And digital transformation has been a big part of our transformation journey over many years, and has been a key part of delivering efficiencies and doing things better, not just as an organisation, but how we deliver services to our communities. I think, as Councillor Hagman touched on, I think AI does, this new generation of AI and what it offers provides real opportunity, but we need to navigate that carefully, but ensure that we are aware and understand how it can provide opportunities to local governments to deliver improvements. Certainly from my point of view, I see it as providing opportunities not necessarily to replace, but to free staff up from many areas, and that's not just back office and transactional functions. That's also about professionals. So, you know, Renfrewshire's going through an AI exploration project at the moment, and we're identifying opportunities, as are other local authorities in the range of functions, such as social care, where there's certain aspects of social workers' roles that AI potentially provides an opportunity to make that much easier, take away certain burdens on their job and free the professional up to concentrate on the value-added aspect of their role. So I think there are real opportunities that we need to explore and understand, and I think it's about how you undertake that journey and do it in a way that maintains safeguards and we understand the technology and how best to take advantage of it.
Okay, thanks. I am going to keep on the workforce issues a little bit more, because one of the things in one of the panels that we had earlier, we heard about the high levels of sickness, and maybe Alan, I'll direct this to you. High levels of sickness and skills shortages are a challenge. That's kind of balanced with the issues around ageing workforce. And then we also heard about violence against local government workers. So potentially putting people off from wanting to come into local government. So just if you could talk to that a little bit, that would be helpful.
I mean, I think in terms of sickness absence, it's certainly been a challenge, and it varies across local government, individual councils to different extents, and there's undoubtedly across the local government workforce there are workforce challenges in terms of attracting and retaining the workforce across the board in terms of different job roles. I don't think local government's unique in that perspective. I think organisations, both in the public and the private sector, are experiencing very much the same sort of challenges. What I would certainly say is go back to, I think it was Councillor Hagman touched on it earlier. I think what local government needs to do is promote the wider package of terms and conditions available. Local government and councils are fantastic employers with family-friendly, inclusive terms and conditions, and you also get the opportunity to make a real difference within your local community. So it is an attractive place to work and forge a career with great career paths developed throughout the organisation. Touching on areas where there are difficulties to recruit, there are lots of individual work streams underway to, for example, work with their academic partners to develop specific courses to deliver planners. There's a shortage of planners, so there's work underway at the University of West of Scotland, for example, and others across the country to bring forward specific courses to produce a pipeline of planners. There's more work going on across other professional disciplines where there's equal challenges faced. So it is about how do we increasingly grow our own, not just to fill gaps in those professional areas, but also recognise that we do have an ageing workforce, and we need to grow younger people entering the workforce. Individual councils do lots of work, through their employability in their schools about attracting young people into the workforce, and graduate and modern apprenticeships programmes have been very successful in that. Some of our colleagues run care academies, certainly South and North Lanarkshire, along with the NHS, they're about attracting young people into the care workforce, which is obviously an area of the workforce where there's an increasingly aged workforce. So there's lots of activity ongoing in terms of promoting local government as a great employer of choice for people.
Thanks for that. It's very helpful to hear what's going on in that space, and a recognition that there needs to be kind of activity going on in order to keep people engaged in thinking, oh yeah, public service is a sector I want to get into as a career path. So I've got a final question, and Stephen, I'm going to direct this to you because I think we've talked about this in the past, and it's around the general power of competence. And I'd be interested to hear what the plans and views are now that on the power of general competence, now that the Scottish Government has consultation is concluded.
Well, I suppose the short answer is we remain very committed to achieving a general power of competence for councils. We believe it would be absolutely an enabling power that would allow us to innovate and to develop services and to develop funding streams, importantly, as well, that would allow us to drive forward improvement in areas that we see that we should be improving. We feel that the lack of general power of competence means that we're forever running up against the ultra-virus principle. That means that when we have a good idea, we often run into an obstacle that prevents us from pursuing it. We look across the border and see England and Wales, and we see that they have a general power of competence, and there are examples that show how this can be used beneficially. In our evidence to the Scottish Government, we provided a 39-page document. I think that I could try and paraphrase it for you here, but I don't think we have time. That shows many examples of where we think that would be beneficial. But absolutely, we view this as empowering power principle for local government that sets aside the European Charter of Local Self-Government as being something that would be innovative and transformational, that would improve the partnership between the local government and the Scottish Government and improve services for the people that we all serve.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to, Jonathan, have you got anything to add on that?
No.
No. Okay. Anybody else? I think maybe he covered it well enough. Yeah.
Yep.
Just can I clarify, Stephen, when you say so one of the things that you're really looking for within the power of general competence is that ability to create revenue-raising streams at a local level, that local authorities can choose at a local level what they might bring in terms of a revenue stream, revenue funding.
I suppose the examples that I would look at are the workplace parking levy and the tourist tax, for want of a better description, which have been brought forward, and we absolutely welcome the Scottish Government and thank them for putting this in place to enable it. But the way that they've been defined perhaps have not matched the ways that local government thinks would be most efficient in terms of collection and implementation. And the lead-in period for this is literally years. So we feel that if we had the general power of competence, we would be able to design such things in consultation with our communities that would be a better fit and easier to operate. But the revenue raising is just one part of it. There's a whole range of other things such as collaboration, working across borders, sharing services that we find would be enabled by having a general power of competence.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher, who wants a supplementary on my question, and I'm going to bring in Jonathan, can respond to both bits. Megan.
Convener, not for this panel. Apologies.
Oh, I see. Okay, Jonathan.
I would just add to what Councillor Heddle just mentioned in terms of, I suppose, it's what's emerging. What do we not yet know about? And one of those would definitely be the green energy sector. What is it that local authorities could tap into or access as an opportunity that we don't yet quite understand or know about? But having said that, with the power available to us, then that wouldn't be just simply taken on board and decisions made inappropriately. I think there's a huge amount of thoughtfulness, business cases, the working through what it is that was actually the sustainability of decisions and choices that are being made. So I think that balancing those two things and understanding when you do apply it and could apply it would certainly offer local authorities the opportunity to access things we don't yet potentially know the full implication for.
And I would imagine when you do that, you would be doing consultations around that, just as you've done on things like the visitor levy. Some local authorities have done on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I think that concludes our questions. Thank you so much. It's been a very useful discussion this morning. Yes, thanks for your contributions. I think we've evolved, haven't we? Because it used to be Katie here on her own with some officials. But I think this is a really good mix to have Solis and SIPFA and Councillor Heddle as well. I think that's been a really splendid panel this morning. So thanks for joining us. And I'm now going to suspend for a few minutes to allow for a changeover of witnesses.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. For our second panel this morning, we're joined by Shona Roopson, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government, Andrew Connell, who's the Local Government Pay and Workforce Lead in the Scottish Government, and Ellen Lever, who's the Acting Director for Local Government at the Scottish Government. And I welcome the Cabinet Secretary and your officials to the meeting this morning. We've got around 90 minutes for this discussion. And I'm going to move straight to questions. So first, we've got a number of themes here. And the first one is around the forthcoming budget. And so you'll be aware that we, at the Conveners Group, asked the First Minister about the multi-year funding and got reassurances from him that that was hopefully going to be forthcoming in the upcoming budget. But I wanted to ask a bit more about that, more certainty about that. That certainly came up in our previous session with COSLA and others. But also that we've heard across the work that we've been doing on the pre-budget scrutiny around the Scottish Government budget that there's still a need for flexibility, that while we've moved in that direction, there's still a call for that. So I'd be interested to hear your views.
Well, thanks for the opportunity this morning, Convener, to come along and talk about reform and associated matters, the budget and anything else that the committee may wish to ask about. So, well, look, I understand the importance of multi-year envelopes and having a line of sight of the funding over the spending review period, not just for local government, I hasten to add, but for other parts of the public sector and indeed third sector organisations as well. So we do understand the value of that. We've not been able to do that before because we've only ourselves had single year budgets and therefore that has been incredibly difficult. We will, of course, have to wait until autumn budget at the end of November to know whether there are any changes to spending review assumptions that were set out by the UK government, and whether there is any unknown impact on what our assumptions are going forward. So there are a lot of caveats to what the size of the pie is, if you like, before we start to discuss what that looks like over the spending review period. In terms of flexibility, again, I understand very much the importance of flexibility. So the 25-26 budget, and of course prior to that there had been a removal of ring fencing, but the 25-26 budget delivered a baselining of a further £524.9 million of funding. That's almost £1.5 billion in the last 2 years. And that was, of course, prior to agreement on an assurance and accountability framework, because those two things go hand in hand. Where we give flexibility, but there are areas that are clear government and most often joint objectives, we do need an assurance and accountability framework to make sure that there's delivery on all of those things, because at the end of the day it'll be ministers in this place that will be asked about the delivery of key areas of policy that are delivered primarily by local government. But I am keen to look at how much further we can go on that, and to work with local government to see if we can make further progress.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So yes, we're all waiting for that autumn UK government budget to find out if it's going to help us out in a very important way. I asked in the previous panel about the time pressures, given that we've got the autumn budget coming later, which has a knock-on effect to the Scottish Government budget coming in mid-January. And I just wanted to get a sense of your thoughts around that pressure that's created and put on local authorities, given that the budget comes in mid-January, but they still have to do things like put the council tax notices out at the same time.
Look, I am very aware of that, and it was a difficult decision. We thought long and hard about what the options were, but given that the UK budget is so late, and then the requirements for the Scottish Fiscal Commission to analyse and provide the information, the critical information that they provide, it was just not going to be possible to do that in a shorter time frame. There are also some, I referred to unknowns. We don't know whether or not there will be changes to taxation at the end of November that could impact on the Scottish Government, and that again may add a layer of complexity that we require to take some time to analyse and come to our conclusions. So that is unfortunately the challenging time frame. I think, and I've been engaging with political parties around this and keen to continue to engage around trying to see if we can reach early agreement around draft budgets, so that the finalising, there's not any changes beyond that are not going to be major. And if we're able to do that, then that will give local government more clarity about the envelopes that they can assume, which will allow them to plan and move forward on that basis. But that will require the goodwill of other parties to reach the more or less the landing space for the budget at draft, with minor changes beyond that. So I'm engaging in good faith with opposition spokespeople on that basis, and so far discussions have been quite positive. So we'll see where we get to with that.
Great, thanks for that.
Sorry,
Ellen. Ellen, yeah, come on in.
I might just add as well, I think in the spirit of the fiscal framework, we're working very closely with our colleagues in local government. Jonathan Belford, who you spoke to earlier, being key amongst those as chair of the Directors of Finance section. So we're working very closely with him about where we can get out ahead, and particularly in the things that make the greatest difference to councils and knowing the detail of their individual settlements. So if we can work on mock bases, for example, to look at early before Christmas the impact of any new data on distributional changes and agree the technical details of that, then we're only having to apply the number to a pre-agreed mechanism. So we're working very much in partnership with our colleagues to look at where we can streamline that process and provide that early clarity the Cabinet Secretary spoke about as soon as possible in the process.
We want to try and be helpful.
Yes, and thanks for that point. And they were also making the point that they are already engaging, and that when the budget comes, it's not the starting point. It's a next step in the phase, but there's also already a lot of work going on. But it's good to hear the detail from what the Scottish Government is doing. I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher, continuing with our forthcoming budget theme just now. She's joining us online and has a number of questions.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and officials. I'd be interested to hear the Cabinet Secretary's view on local authorities being able to increase council tax next year as they see fit. Last year, in the 2025-26 financial year, we saw councils such as Falkirk Council increase their council tax by 15.6%, and I'm increasingly concerned that if councils follow in this same mind this year, that it will have consequences on council taxpayers, individuals, families who might be struggling to meet those increased costs. So I'd be interested to hear the Cabinet Secretary's view on that.
Well, look, first of all, I recognise the point that Megan Gallagher is making about council taxpayers and fairness. I would just point out, just for context, that the provision of the budget to local government did see a further real terms increase in funding in 25-26, which was after increases in revenue funding in both the last 2 financial years. And that's not just us that are saying that, that's been independently verified by the Accounts Commission. So, and maybe also just for longer term context, the total local government finance settlement has increased by almost 50% between 2013-14 and 25-26. So that's the background context. Now, that's not to say, and I should say, I fully recognise that costs have increased for every part of the public sector. So if you look at the role of inflation, everything costs more, and of course pay has increased because of inflationary pressures. So I absolutely accept all of that. Now, we did say to local government that we thought that because of it being a reasonable settlement, that we hoped that council tax increases would be kept to a minimum. There was a real difference across the country, as I'm sure Megan Gallagher will be aware of big differences of council tax rises. Now, we will set out our position at budget around this, but you've just heard from local government, who of course will argue very strongly against any freezes or caps, and they'll set out why they are against such moves. I mean, we have funded freezes and caps in the past, but we're also keen to give local government the flexibilities that they require. We are also addressing some of the issues of particular local authorities. So you mentioned one in particular where there is a fragility around some of our smaller local authorities, and that's why we're keen to work with them in the reform space to look at things like shared services where cost can be better managed across 2 or 3 local authorities coming together to share services. We think that is a good example of reform, and the Invest to Save fund, which I'm sure we'll come on to, is there to help oil the wheels of changes such as those. So, we will come to our conclusions on this, but we understand the impact on council taxpayers, and that's why we have given that real terms uplift to local government over the last few years.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer there, but I hope the Cabinet Secretary also understands that there's a huge pressure when we look at core budgets. So that's areas where there hasn't been any ring fencing and services that are not protected effectively by ring fencing of Scottish Government funding, and those are the areas that you're seeing decreases and cuts to services in that space. If I may move on to the issues that councils will be grappling with, because we've heard in our evidence sessions that local government are required to meet paid demands of workers. There'll be ongoing discussions heading into budgets on that, but also in relation to the growing dissatisfaction with council services. And you heard Unison, who were giving evidence claiming that this was dangerous. There is a reduced level of trust in local government, and there has been an increase in the number of complaints regarding council services. That's increased by 21% over the last year. So I'd be interested in the Cabinet Secretary's view how she's going to assist local government to help those situations, to help find solutions to those situations, and to make sure that we're not going into a local government budget setting where you're going to have communities put against the council who are just trying to meet the financial pressures that they're experiencing within their own local authority area.
Well, look, first of all, just let me reiterate the fact that there has been a real terms increase to local government funding against, a difficult financial backdrop across the whole of public services. So, this is, and I cited the figures earlier on, and those are independent and verified by the Accounts Commission, who confirmed the real terms increase. However, all of the public sector is facing pressures around inflationary costs that impact on the cost of delivering every single service, whether it's in local government, whether it's in the health service. Pay is driven, of course, by inflation as well, and that is a challenge that we have been working with local government to help navigate. And I should say, and put on record that I very much recognise and value the significant contribution that all local government workers make to delivering public services across Scotland. And I'm also pleased that we have managed to support local government in getting to the fair and affordable 2-year pay offer that COSLA made earlier in the year. I think that will give some stability and the opportunity for local government to engage with staff around what reforms they may wish to take forward within the local government space. We have given funding flexibilities and additional funding to help COSLA make an offer like that and to prevent costly industrial action. So, we have been working with local government in a very difficult financial backdrop to manage through these issues. Now, the spending review, we will set out as a government our choices and the envelopes that we think are affordable and appropriate for all parts of the public sector. The Scottish Fiscal Commission has challenged the other parties to set out their envelopes as an alternative if they feel that the envelopes we're setting out are not adequate to meet the needs of whether it's local government or whether it's health. But that does then mean difficult choices. But those choices are there for others to make. But, we will set out our budget envelopes going forward, and, we will be judged on that. And, the whole of the public sector is having to reform, which is why we have set out a very, very clear reform strategy, because doing things in the same way as we've always done is not going to be sustainable. And, that is why we've got such a focus on public service reform, because we recognise that. And we need to make sure that the funding goes further through the reforms. And, of course, local government will have to play its part in that as well.
Thank you very much. And just finally on statutory services, because there is a concern and a growing concern that areas that are not directly protected in one way or another will go back to statutory services in local authority areas. You've seen that, and you've seen tensions between the communities and local government councillors who are trying to balance the needs of their communities with budgets that they've been given. And of course, the Cabinet Secretary will be aware that it's roughly 80 to 85% of funding that's given directly from the Scottish Government, as opposed to what they can generate from council tax increases. So is the Cabinet Secretary concerned about this, and does she understand that this could generate a higher increase in complaints to local government in future years if local government is not given a fair funding settlement?
Well, I would contend that local government has been given a fair funding settlement. It's received a real terms increase. So that means, that there's been a recognition of the pressures of inflation, which have impacted on all parts of the public sector. But the funding is the funding, and a real terms settlement has been provided, and more flexibility has been provided. I'm keen to look at further flexibilities, and we're keen to work with local government around that. But ultimately, the decisions of each individual local authority and the priorities that they set are for them as autonomous bodies elected by their local population. And, coming back to the point about reform, one of the reasons I'm really keen to support local government to reform is the point made by Megan Gallagher about the way services are delivered. So we need to see more shared services across local government boundaries. We need to see the better use of digital and automation in order to provide a better service to the public, or a more easily accessible service to the public. All of these things are challenges for all parts of the public sector, and we're keen to work with local government, many of whom are getting on and looking at all of that, and we're keen to support that, because that is the way that we will make the money go further, because the horizon, the outlook through the spending review, and you can see that what has been set out by the UK government does not, it's an average of a 0.8% increase in funding over the spending review period. So there is not lots of money sitting about doing nothing. It has all been allocated, and the outlook is very tight indeed. So decisions need to be made around, if beyond the real terms increases that we've given to local government, if we were to go further to give further funding to local government, that's going to have to come from somewhere. So does it come from health? Does it come from other parts of the budget? These are the challenges that will be set out in the spending review. We'll set out our choices, and obviously it is up to others to set out alternative choices.
Okay. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much, Megan. And we're going to stay online. We're going to change our theme to transformation, and I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin with a couple of questions.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary.
Good morning.
We talk about the transformation agenda, and I just wonder, what is the government's understanding of transformation? What does transformation mean? What will the transformation process look like in local government, and what does a transformed local government look like at the end of the road?
So, transformation, means that services need to be provided in a way that maintains a quality of service, but looks to deliver things in a way that are more efficient and effective and can make resources go further. So, I've mentioned already the opportunity for shared services, and I'm thinking particularly in those areas it's difficult to recruit. So some of the areas that come to mind are areas like planning, for example, but there are good examples already of local authorities sharing waste management services and back office functions. There are many opportunities to do that. Also, the use of digital, and there were some good examples in the first round of Invest to Save, where local authorities were looking at digital solutions. So if you look at Glasgow, for example, they received £100,000 for a Smart and Connected Social Places programme, looking at digital solutions to enhance public services and deliver efficiency gains in housing and health and social care. In Perth and Kinross, they got £500,000 to reduce energy costs and deliver a reduction in environmental impact. And Falkirk and Clackmannanshire were given £2 million to look at closer collaboration and shared services. So those are, there are many other examples, but those are the areas I think are ripe for looking at. And I should also add, it doesn't just need to be between local authorities. There can be transformation within local government and health, and of course the single authority model is being looked at in some areas of the country that are particularly where there's coterminous boundaries between health and local government, looking at other public sector bodies within the localities. The point here, though, is that looking at the trajectory of funding and all the pressures on public finances, that's the type of area that we need to look at to make sure that that public services can be sustained going forward. And they're not the only. Every part of the public sector is having to look at this.
Okay, thanks for that. There was an area of transformation that I was interested in, and I don't know if the Cabinet Secretary will be a follower or a watcher of Tom Hunter and Willie Hawkey's podcast, but Tom Hunter made a commitment on that podcast to fund an AI-powered planning portal for the Scottish public sector, and I just wonder if that's a particular area that the government have looked at, and if they have been in contact with Tom Hunter and started any discussions or negotiations on that offer.
Well, I haven't seen that particular podcast, but we are always up for good ideas, and I'll pick up with colleagues, because it may be that one of my colleagues, Ivan McKee, obviously leads on planning, and we've looked at reform through the planning hub and being able to supplement some of the really challenging big planning applications that local authorities are going to be faced with. So the whole idea of the planning hub is, a transformation, but also a vehicle to support some of the pressures that local authorities are facing. But if there are some technical digital solutions that can help with the process, I am all up for that. And if Tom Hunter's not been contacted, I will make sure that he is, and we'll follow up to see whether that is something that can be looked at in more detail.
Yeah, thanks for that. And finally, Convener, I just wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can say how the local government transformation agenda fits into the larger public service reform agenda of the Scottish Government. We heard examples from the previous panel about how Councillor Heddle had been involved in presenting with Ivan McKee at the Scottish Government's Public Service Reform Day, but I just wonder how closely linked the government's reform agenda and local government transformation programmes are, and how close that working is.
Well, it's very close, and we were really pleased to see local government represented at the Minister for Public Finance's recent PSR operational summit on the 14th of October, where there were over 140 public service leaders there. I mean, local government are absolutely at the heart of this, and not just in terms of the relationship with each other, but the point I was making earlier about the relationship with the wider public sector. I think there is real scope, perhaps taking a kind of place-based approach for the sharing of back office functions, the support, and looking at estate and sharing of estate, which there has been progress made, but there's loads more that can be done in that space as well. So just to give assurance to the committee that local government are very much at the heart of things, and that's exactly where they should be.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to bring in Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and colleagues. Could I just continue with the theme of transformation? Do you agree with the Commission's view that it's becoming increasingly urgent to see the transformation agenda taking place? Now, in the previous panel and in previous sessions at the committee, Shona, we've heard plenty of examples of transformation coming about because of budget pressures or even COVID. The disaster that COVID brought to us meant we had to radically rethink a lot of things. But do you think there's enough of a balance between reacting to situations, whether it's budget pressures or COVID scenarios, comparing with the ability to think differently and to do things differently just because we want to and we need to?
Well, I think we have to absolutely be proactive and think differently, and that requires leadership at all levels, and it requires a willingness to do things differently. And, yeah, we need to oil the wheels of that. That's why the Invest to Save fund is, the first iteration, and I should put on record I'm keen for that to be a strand through the spending review that is able to be a supportive vehicle for further change. But we're not starting from scratch here. When you look at reform, over the years we've seen major reform in the justice system that reduced the number of young people being prosecuted in adult courts. We've seen the investment in childcare, helping parents get back to work. We've seen the reform of policing into a single body that has I think demonstrated, particularly with serious organised crime, being able to respond. So, and we've seen in local government, shared services in many parts of the country. But I think we're only scratching at the surface of the potential here, and we all have to realise that it's not really a kind of nice to do. It's an absolute fundamental, because of that spending outlook is very tight indeed. So so we therefore need to look at the investment that is already in the system for whether it's local government or whether it's health and social care. We need to look at maximising that resource to the front line and doing things differently through automation and digital to ensure that that money goes as far as possible to continue to provide good quality services. So that is the challenge, and we can see that there are great examples of doing that and being able to create efficiencies that are then able to be reinvested. And that I want to see the savings through Invest to Save being able to almost be a kind of catalyst for more and more transformation across the public sector. So there is far more scope, and there's always the coalition of the willing. You always get those who are first out of the starting blocks, and then you always get those in every part of the public sector that are a bit slower to come to the table. But this is the direction that the whole public sector needs to go in.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. My other question was on the funding formula. I don't know whether you heard the previous session, and I invited our COSLA colleagues to say something about the funding formula, the allocation to councils. As you know yourself, Cabinet Secretary, if an authority is losing population, it tends to lose money. And despite the floors and the ceilings and all that, if you're a small authority, a rural authority, and your population is declining, you lose money. Is there any way that the government might consider looking at that formula to try to ensure that that basically doesn't happen, particularly for smaller rural authorities where the costs are higher to deliver service in the rural communities? So we've heard this message for over a number of years at this committee, so it's just to ask the government, is there a view on that and whether the funding formula needs to be tweaked a little?
Well, look, it is a complex formula, and it is designed to try to take an objective assessment of need and use the most up-to-date information, looking at indicators like population that you've referred to, but also rurality and deprivation. It is kept under constant review, but it is agreed with COSLA on behalf of 32 local authorities, 32 sometimes different interests, and that is the challenge, because trying to get everybody to agree changes when there'll be winners and losers is incredibly difficult. I'm always open to suggestions about how we can improve the funding formula, but that any proposals for change really need to be generated through COSLA in the first instance, and they need to try to come to some consensus that recognises some of that. Now, we have tried to work with local authorities in different ways as well, through things like the Whole Family Wellbeing Fund. We're working with local authorities to try and address deprivation and get really upstream with prevention work. And so there are some funding streams, if you like, that try to recognise some of that. We've also worked with our island authorities to recognise some of the needs that island authorities have and the costs of that. And again, we've tried to do that directly with island authorities. So we have, in some ways, recognised some of the challenges. But the core funding formula, if I was to pitch up and say I'm going to decide, I can imagine I'll have 32 voices, some of which might be happy, some of which will definitely not be happy. So, I come back to the point that there is always room for improvement, but I think it would certainly not be in the spirit of Verity House if I was to, overrule local government's consensus on this. But, we continue to discuss, and I do think around the edges and around some of these other funds that we may be able to address some of the issues that you've referred to.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'm now going to bring in, staying with the same theme, transformation, I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, we've already heard today, and you've indicated that transformation is already there. And councils are doing and supporting and have choices and are attempting to make better services for the communities they represent. But we still hear from the public at large that they believe that they are paying more and they're getting less from the council services. So you've touched today on the Invest to Save fund and the programme, and you've said already that you want that fund to oil the wheels. So can I ask what engagement the Scottish Government has had with local authority about the projects? Because you, as a government, ring-fenced £6 million for local government to support. And I would ask the question about the genuine public sector reform. Does that see genuine public sector reform? Because we had some discussion from the previous panel about that councils need to have oven-ready policies or oven-ready things to take place because the timescale is tight, but they don't always manage to get in to the programmes or the funds unless they're well advanced and they're well planned to do that. So it would just be an indication from you as to how the Scottish Government engaged and how local government supports that, and will that see genuine public sector reform?
So on your first comment about the pressures facing public sector, we talked earlier about the inflationary pressures, everything costing more, pay inflation, and that's before we get on to demographics. So the pressures on services, not just local government but health, because of the demographic changes. So there will be more demands on all public services because of that. So that's why we need to ensure that we prioritise getting funds to the front line. We've been pretty explicit about that, and when we set out the public service reform strategy and set out the financial sustainability delivery plan, all of it was about reduction corporate costs through doing things differently. Digital has a huge role to play in that, as do shared services, rationalising the estate and getting as much money into those frontline public services. But also those frontline public services can be delivered in a different way. The Invest to Save fund is not the only thing. It is, we expect all public services to be getting on with this agenda anyway. Invest to Save is really about helping to oil the wheels of some of that change, where it is, if you've maybe got a twin track of this is the existing service, but you want to transform it over here, but it will take a bit of investment to make that happen. And we've been explicit around priorities are shared services, integrated working, digital innovation and community empowerment, the opportunity for communities to take on assets, and sometimes some of those assets that local government and other public bodies have, are either surplus to requirements or are coming under pressure because of funding pressures. Communities have quite often taken on those assets and really made them work in a way that has not been able to be done through statutory services. So I'm a big supporter of that. So it is, the Invest to Save was, the starter for 10, if you like, around what will be the level of interest, and it was a bidding in fund. I am keen to keep an Invest to Save proposition going, and that I mentioned earlier on, through the spending review, because I do think if the public sector knows that this isn't going to be a one-off, one-year fund, then they will work on perhaps projects that are going to take 2 or 3 years to deliver, and those might be more ambitious. We do know from the work that Ivan McKee has done is that the return on investment has to be set out and has to be clear and has to be deliverable and tangible. So the projects that will be funded will be those that are going to show a return. And that money can then be reinvested. So this is about getting a gearing effect going. And there has been a huge level of interest, and we will want to see more of that.
Good. And the council leaders and Unison also talked about their concerns that there already has been efficiencies having already been achieved across local government, and that the backroom reductions can lead to an increased pressure on the front room staffing, and that has an implication for workforce. So it would be good to get a view on your idea of how you see that, because many have said that the backroom functions could be adapted, but those are now saying that those backroom functions are now so crucial that it's having an impact on the frontline services.
Look, first of all, let me be clear. I recognise that there will be, back office functions as we describe them that will be critical to frontline delivery, of course. But there is also the ability, though, sometimes to share some of those functions. So if you think about in the local government space, each local authority, to a greater or lesser extent, has people who are there to support the education function people who are there to support the corporate functions, the various functions of local authorities. And one of the questions is, well, could those functions support and be shared across more than one local authority? And I think you see that that's been done. So I think in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire they already share some of those education support functions. There are some in the west of Scotland. There are shared services around waste management services where one local authority is contracted to another to provide those services. It's saved a lot of money. I guess my point is we need to see that everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah. So we see good practice, but if that was to happen everywhere, what would that look like in terms of making sure that the money that is available can sustain the services that need to be sustained? And I go back to that demographic challenge, and we just need to think about social care for a moment and the requirements to change the way social care is delivered. And, there is scope there as well. But with those demographic challenges, that budget is not going to be reducing. It's going to have to continue to increase. So if given we accept that, then we do need to look at how services are delivered. And I think there is a coming to the table now of willing volunteers who want to look, and that is quite tricky because you're talking about giving up a bit of power and trust of and accountability and all of that, but I make the point, some local authorities have got on and they've done it, so it can be done.
Thank you, Camille.
Thanks, Alexander. Just before I bring in Evelyn Tweed, who's going to take us into workforce issues more deeply, I just wanted to come back on the Invest to Save Fund, because one of the points that came up in the previous panel was, I can't remember what the overall envelope of it is, but there's 6 million that is for local government, and one of the comments was, in a time where we're trying to do those efficiencies and share across, they're interested in kind of sharing maybe out with local government. And so that was kind of one of the things they were talking about is, could there be more flexibility so that that money is just available for public bodies, and then there can be more collaboration across whoever they want to work. They didn't indicate necessarily who they might want to work with, but I thought that was an interesting comment.
Yeah, well, look, the pot that we announced was just just shy of 30 million, and your bids have come in from across the public sector, and the criteria, as I set out, the priorities would be given to reform that is in the space of those priorities around, digital shared services, getting more upstream, prevention, all of that. I would welcome bids that come in that are maybe a place-based approach that say, well, we're going to share these corporate functions with other public sector bodies. Now, they need to overcome some of the governance arrangements there, but if there's back office functions that can be shared across more than one public body, then, I'm all for that. And the states as well, we need to get out of particularly given, mentioned COVID earlier on, working patterns have without doubt changed, and they're unlikely to go back to the working practices of the past. And therefore the estate can look different because people are working in different ways. And that sharing of space, the coming together and provision of services all under one roof and so on and so forth has huge possibilities. So, we shouldn't think about this just on sectoral terms. If good ideas come in and they're fully worked through and they can show that they're going to make savings and can be delivered, then we're all ears. Ellen, yeah.
If I may just add as well, I think we've taken a very collaborative approach with local government to that targeted 6 million pot, both in how we designed with them, how we would invite bids, bearing in mind in discussion with colleagues in local government, they agreed that that pot divided 32 ways would be meaningless. So there was a really good collaborative process between us with colleagues I believe you saw earlier in September from Solace, Malcolm Burr, Don Roberts and others to decide how best to put bids together that would make the best use of that available funding to take forward projects as the Cabinet Secretary described. But we've also had close engagement since. I meet regularly with a number of these chief executives, and particularly in the Falkirk and Clackmannanshire space, and how they've progressed that work. We've flexed how they can use that funding since. Most recently, we've had a discussion with them where they've identified opportunities to expand the work they're doing out to other public sector bodies within their localities. Okay. And we've been very much embracing, together with Mr McKee and with colleagues in the policy team, that they can indeed use that funding in a flexible way. Those two chief executives remain accountable for that funding, but there's no barrier to them involving other partners. Indeed, we encourage it.
Okay, so could it be then that local authority are not completely bound by, local government's not completely bound by the 6 million? They could collaborate with another public body and tap into more of the close to 30 million?
Yeah, and I think as the fund evolves, this isn't going to be a fixed. That's we're going to learn lessons from how this first tranche of funding has been delivered. What were any impediments? Other things that we need to change around the flexibility of it. So we're not set to have the same again in exactly the same way. What we do want to do though is to encourage. And I'm really keen, as I said earlier, that I want this to be seen as an ongoing process, so not as a one-off. Yeah. Transformation is going to take many years, so we need to make sure that our support for that. And it's not just about that fund. The Improvement Service has a huge role to play, as does Solace and all of the kind of professional advisors. So that support for transformation can come in funds, or it can come in kind and through the expertise of those who have already done it, and that sharing of practice of, well, this is how we did it. Think about Glasgow and the work they've done around reducing the number of children in care, for example. I think I'm aware that a lot of local authorities have been knocking on Glasgow's door to find out how they've done that, because they see the value of reducing the number of children in care and doing things differently. Great.
That's just good to get that clarity, and I certainly take your point from earlier that you're looking for that gearing effect and getting local authorities kind of aware that this is an opportunity for them. I'm going to bring in Evelyn Tweed now. Evelyn.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary and to officials. Thanks for your answers so far. Can you offer your views, Cabinet Secretary, on workforce challenges that are faced by local government, including high sickness levels, skill shortages, recruitment issues? We've heard from witnesses that agency staff are being used to cover these shortages, which is often short-term, it's expensive. How can these issues be effectively challenged?
Look, first of all, let me recognise that these are issues not just for local government. The Health Service has some of the same challenges. And I thought the Accounts Commission report on this in the summer, I thought was very helpful. They called on councils to align workforce plans and strategic priorities so they can ensure their workforces are the right size and shape and their staff have the right skills. So it's having the right people in the right place. And going back to the shortages, we know that there are some critical workforce shortages, and if you look at where they mainly are, no surprise that social work and social care. So not every part of the workforce is going to be on a downwards trajectory. If you look at social care and the investment required into the future, we will need more people to come and work in health and social care. So it is, though, about making sure that that the funds are going to be there to prioritise those frontline services, which will mean doing things differently elsewhere. One of the other areas, and we've touched on this already, around planners and environmental health officers, those are areas I think that are ripe for the shared service space, because what happens at the moment is councils try to hold on to those specialist staff and they go to another local authority because it might be a bigger local authority that has a better rate of pay. Is there something we could do on a regional basis in that space? There might be some services that could be nationally provided. We absolutely need to be willing to have those discussions of whether every one of 32 local authorities needs every one of those. Now there are some already where there's some shared staff, and I welcome that, but it needs to be the default. It needs to be across the board. And there will be some larger local authorities that perhaps provide that service to neighbouring local authorities that are of a smaller size. And we just need to get our heads into that space as well, because otherwise they're all fishing in the same small pond for people, rather than looking at, well, how can we provide the service in a different way that still provides the service, but can that in a more sustainable way, because the costs of recruitment and then having to backfill with perhaps agency staff because there are gaps in service, it is an expensive way to deliver services. I think there's also some really good examples in the social care space where some local authorities have been able to recruit and retain staff more ably than others. And so what is it they've been doing that has enabled them to hold on to staff and reduce agency costs? Same in the health service. Some health boards have managed that better than others. And again, we need to, where there's good practice and something's been shown to work, I would need some convincing about why that's not being adopted elsewhere, if I could be so blunt. So, so there are a lot of, this isn't kind of some magic kind of complex answer. A lot of the answers are already there, but they need to be scaled up, and it needs to become the kind of default of the way services are provided.
Thanks for that answer. How do you think we can promote that sort of collaborative working between local authorities to share more services?
Well, I think COSLA. Sorry to interrupt. I think COSLA and local government itself have an important role to play here through the improvement service. The whole idea there is that through the improvement service and that there would be collaboration around good practice. Why would you not want to roll that out? This isn't particular to local government. I've seen it in the health service as well, that there is sometimes a little bit of, not invented here, and, and also change is difficult because you have to try, and sometimes there are barriers to change, and folk, so it can be a difficult thing, but that's no reason not to do it. And I do think that, if another local authority or a health board or whatever, has shown that a service can be more sustainable, a better delivery and more cost effective, why on earth would you not want to get on and do the same? And that has got to be the cultural change. It requires leadership, but it requires a cultural change that is about thinking in this territory. And, I don't believe there is a single part of the public sector that cannot be improved and transformation take place. We should always be striving to use, particularly given the tools that are now at our disposal in terms of digital and automation. We can do things in a different way that will help to release resources and people to do other tasks, for sure.
Thank you for that. And that leads me in nicely to my next question. Previous witnesses have discussed the opportunities and threats of digital skills and solutions in the local government workforce, including AI. So what can be done now in terms of the digital skill space? And what are your thoughts on AI? Because we have heard from witnesses that they're concerned that there'll be job losses due to AI.
So, clearly, AI is a tool that is about, it doesn't operate on its own. It is about making sure it's a tool to make improvements. It's a tool that is there to be used to essentially, carry out tasks that, previously would have been quite labour intensive. Now, I would be keen to look then at the skills that people are then able to perhaps develop and to do more complex tasks, that more simpler tasks can be taken forward through automation. and to be able to use AI as a tool to provide information, to make judgments about services. So I'm looking at, the Aberdeen City Council. They got 1.2 million out of the Invest to Save. And they used, this was to address increasing demands and pressures from an ageing population with complex care needs by developing advanced digital tools to enhance care efficiency and quality, ensuring services are flexible, comprehensive and person-centred. So, understanding, where, what your service users, who they are, what their needs are, and how you overlay that with the best use of your workforce. Automation and AI and digital tools can be absolutely critical in that space to make sure that you are optimising your use of your workforce to deliver the task in hand. Now, that obviously will be overseen by people and making sure that the end user, particularly if it's a vulnerable or someone who is older, we're not talking about here, removing that interface of people in people's homes for intimate care. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using tools to be more efficient about who goes where, when, to whom and why, and also looking at things like dementia tools to enhance the service delivered by people to keep people safe in their own homes. Now, some of those are long-standing. They're not things that have just been developed. But the potential here for optimising and making sure that public services are being delivered in the most efficient way is absolutely an opportunity that we should not turn our backs on here, that other countries are embracing. We're not unique here. We need to embrace it, not just in local government, but in the health service as well, to get the most out of the funding that we have and to try and release people to do some of those more complex roles that there will be. But also, I set out, and we made no bones about this, around the size and cost of the public sector as a whole in Scotland. We need to reduce that, because it's not sustainable, and every part of the public sector has to play its part in making sure that we can afford the public sector that we have, and importantly we can prioritise and redirect funding to the front line to support social care and other growing areas of demand, because we've got no choice. That's what we need to do.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That's me, Convener.
Thanks very much. Just on the big hopes for AI, and I hear your point about the opportunities there, but I do think, and it didn't come up in the last panel, but it's just kind of come to my mind, that I think I'd be interested to understand what the government, what sense the government has, because these data centres are going to use a huge amount of energy, and I just wonder if we're preparing properly for that need when we're trying to roll out our renewable energy sector, we're trying to upgrade a grid and all that kind of thing. Is that being taken on board?
Yes, I mean, it's not my area of specialist knowledge, but these are all areas that are considered as part of the energy requirements going forward of our country and the energy use that will be required in the modern world. And data is just one part of that, but it is a critical part. I mean, we absolutely need, we not only, we could be at the forefront of much of this technology. We have some fantastic data centres and data capability here in the city of Edinburgh in particular, where you've got, innovation and partnering with your universities who are really at the forefront of using this knowledge for public good. Mm-hmm. This isn't about some kind of, out there on it. So this is about using this knowledge and capability for improving public services for the public goods. But yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to write to you, Convener, if you'd like a little bit more assurance around, the data centre issue in particular.
I think that would be good because we're putting a lot of hopes of AI helping local government, and given we're trying to kind of keep an eye on what's going on for them, that would be really helpful. Yeah,
happy
thanks.
to do that.
We've got a couple more questions. I've got a question around council tax reform. So it was great to get your letter yesterday. And I think before the summer, we were here in this room together talking about the revaluation aspect of that. But I'd be interested to hear, so we've got the letter and understanding the consultation to be launched. I think we were hoping that that might have happened sooner. But just to hear any more progress made on the research and the engagement you've undertaken around the council tax reform. For example, what you found from the IFS analysis, and your hopes for the launch of the consultation.
So let me say some high-level things first. So the consultation sets out a range of options, and I've been clear before, and I'll be clear again. None of which are ours, endorsed by the Scottish Government. This is about choices to put out there to try and see whether there is a potential political consensus to be built. Because I note that, I was looking at some of the comments, and every single party in the Scottish Parliament has said that continuing with valuations at 1991 levels is not a sustainable or correct thing to do. So the question then is, what can we do about that, and whether there is a landing space for doing things differently and taking forward reform. It is going to take a lot of time, and we've talked about at least a decade for substantial reforms. There are some things that could be done sooner than that, around the number of bands and all of that, even within the existing valuation system. But I guess looking at a couple of the headlines this morning, is there? Can we agree on what changes should happen? There has been a bit of a predictable political opportunism and misinformation, if I can say so, from some outlets, which, does that bode well or not? I guess it's whether we're up for a serious discussion about it or not. We could go another decade without any change if there's not that political consensus to do something about it. And let me just, take the opportunity to reassure the public, one clear principle that we've stated is that we're clear that any proposal which on its own would lead to a significant increase in council tax in any particular area would not be acceptable to us, and we wouldn't support that. So some of the lurid kind of numbers being bandied about on the basis of a consultation doesn't help to inform the public. I think the work the IFS have done is very good. It's very factual. Those are the options. There are areas, other things we could look at, like local revaluations, far more complex to do, but it would address some of the issues like the increase in property prices in the Edinburgh and Lothians, because each area would then take as a starting point the understanding that growth. So you would do it, but it's more complex to do, but it is an option. And frankly, if there was a landing space around options like that, I think that's something that merits further discussion. I should also just point out, again, because of some of the kind of misinformation, that any exercise, I think, and our position, our contention as a government would be that it should be revenue neutral. So the idea this is some kind of mad revenue raising kind of, approach from the Scottish Government to take people's money, it could not be further from the truth, because one of the principles we wouldn't budge from is it's got to be revenue neutral. So it isn't about raising more money, it's about fairness and having a system that's fairer and and all of that. So look, the consultation is out there. We're keen to hear what the public have to say about all of this, and we're also keen to hear what other parties have got to say. And I know that COSLA are engaging as part of their manifesto development for next year with each of the parties. I think that can only be a good thing, and the report will come next year on the back of the consultation, which will end at the end of January, and it will be then for parties to decide what they do with that, whether they put forward a proposition into their manifestos, and then the public will decide and judge how important they see this as an issue, and it will be for the next Parliament, really, convener in truth, to try and look at whether there is a landing space. This is just putting this out there to see whether work can be done that can help create a landing space in the next Parliament.
Thanks. Can I just clarify something? You said that it wouldn't be likely to happen within a decade. Is that within this decade or within 10 years?
Well, it's going to take a number of years. Revaluation itself would take 3, and we're not, and there's not political agreement on that. So, I think the first thing to do before we get into, whether it, what we do is to see whether genuinely do people think something needs to change. And I could read through all the opposition comments. There isn't a party in this place that hasn't said that. So the next question is, well, where might there be a level of agreement? We're not going to agree on everything. And, some of the kind of more kind of, so we're not going to agree on it, everything. But where is the potential for agreement? And I think that is where the discussion that will be taken forward by someone other than me in the next Parliament could begin to shape whether that can begin to plot out over a number of years the changes it would make. Because one of the, the IFS have pointed out that there are a number of ways that you could really give soft landings to any change over a number of years through gradual transitional arrangements that could span as long as you wanted them to span, so that any changes take place very gradually over a number of years. But we need to have a starting point. And, I've been really clear, because I don't want political opportunism to scupper this, is that we've got to have a starting point of agreement here. Otherwise it gets lost in the noise of political opportunism. So that's a challenge, and, we're keen to hear what people have to say.
Yeah, certainly I think, again, before the summer, we got to a point in the committee where we realised that we want some change. It's going to need to be something that gets started on in session 7 with early doors. And I really take your point around the revenue neutral piece and it being about fairness, which is what they managed to achieve in Wales. So if they can achieve it in Wales, I would hope that we could actually get to that point here in Scotland. I believe Megan Gallagher might want a supplementary on this question.
Thank you. And it is on the point of principle on council tax reform, and I would be interested to know from the Cabinet Secretary whether she believes that households and council tax bands E and upwards should pay more in council tax as a point of principle. So it would be interested to hear our views on that.
So let me, first of all, I agree with something Megan Gallagher herself said. You said that you agreed, well, it was Graham Simpson that said at the time, that it's absurd that we use evaluations from 1991. A wider piece of work would need to be undertaken, that we'd need to decide whether to introduce legislation on council tax reform. So we all seem to be in a space that we agree that the evaluations of 1991 are not the correct ones. So, what we don't then go from is that to, oh well, so we're going to, put people's council tax up in the higher council tax brackets, because that immediately then breaks any potential consensus. So I said earlier on, and let me just repeat it, that we would not be in favour of a position that which on its own, a proposal which on its own, without any of the mitigations, would lead to a significant increase in council tax in any particular area. So that's our starting point. We don't believe that people's council tax in whatever area and whatever bracket should see significant increases. So if there was to be changes, there would have to be mitigations over a number of years that would smooth any changes. Now, you could go for a local revaluation where the starting point would actually reflect the higher prices of homes in that area. So you could do that rather than a national revaluation, which would take account of the point that's been made, and I'm very sympathetic to, about the Edinburgh and Lothians in particular. So rather than let's get in straight away to, are you going to... I'm not doing anything. I have said we don't endorse any of the potential solutions set out in the consultation, for the very reason that if we set out our position, someone's immediately going to disagree with it. So I am very neutral and agnostic on what the solution is here, other than the principles I've set out about no significant increase in council tax in any particular area and that it has to be revenue neutral. Beyond that, I am up for a discussion about whether we can find a landing zone and some consensus.
I hear what the Cabinet Secretary is saying on this point, but I think it's very important to add that if we don't have points of principle and if we don't have the government setting out clearly what their intentions are, bearing in mind it has taken, nearly 2 decades for the Scottish Government to go back to this point, to go out to another consultation on council tax, I think it could lead to yet another example of where a consultation is had and then the next Parliament doesn't agree and then the conversation is stopped thereafter again. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that there is a risk of that?
Well, I think sorry to interrupt. I think what we all have to do is to set out our principles. So I've set out 2 principles here. One is that we would not support a proposal that would lead to a significant increase in council tax in any particular area. Secondly, that it has to be revenue neutral. So those are 2 principles that I've set out. I would be keen to hear what the principles are from the other parties to see whether or not we get all those principles set out in an honest, open way. So where are there some landing spaces given those principles that we've all set out? So those are my principles. Beyond that, I'm willing to look at where there might be a landing space to make progress. And this is what has stalled progress being made in the past, because we've not been able to reach enough of a political agreement on some of those principles. So let's see whether, and every party has an opportunity to come back on the consultation. COSLA are meeting with each individual political party. We've got a chance to develop our own policies in the manifesto space. But, if we start, let's set out our principles. I've set out 2, and I would be keen to hear other principles set out from other parties.
And finally, Cabinet Secretary, could you give us an indication of what significant means in relation to significant increase? Because again, significant for one individual could mean something to another. So it'd be helpful, again, to get that point of clarity.
Significant, unaffordable, astronomical, high, unreasonable. I'm not going to, you can't put figures on this, but I think we all recognise what we're not wanting to do here is to hike people's council tax up, either because they happen to live in an area where they've seen high increases in property values, not something that is anything, down to no fault of theirs. I would not support a position that penalised people in the Edinburgh and Lothians, for example, because they happen to have seen big increase in their property values. So these are the type of details that we would want to work through and to look at what does reasonable mean, what are the mitigations, and of course that is an option to mitigate over a number of years any increase in costs that someone may face if we were able to reach an agreement on a system. Then you could mitigate that over a number of years of a transition so that it was a very, very small, modest increase that was, not significant in any reasonable person's estimation. But, we're miles and miles and miles away from that because we're having a debate at the moment that has not landed on a potential consensus. So instead of trying to find areas of division and, challenging each other to try and say, well, I want to out you on, you're going to do this or you're going to do that. Incidentally, the example highlighted by one of your colleagues this morning around an increase was taking the extreme on a 14-band model, which I've not agreed to and, is an option, but I've not agreed to it, on properties worth over 1.8 million. So if we're going to start and say, well, this is what you're trying to do, I'm not trying to do that. It's not my proposition. But, the more we try to do that, the less chance there genuinely is of finding some common cause here to actually try and do something about those 1991 property valuations. So, I just point out that, let's not start with areas of division and actually try and find areas where principles can be set out and we might actually find we agree with some of those. So that would be my plea and suggestion.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to move on and I'm going to take us to general powers of competence. So we brought that question up in the previous panel, and they were keen to say that they remain committed to pursuing it, and talked about the potential opportunities if they did have general powers of competence for emerging opportunities such as green energy. And I just recognise that the Scottish Government ran a consultation that is concluded, but COSLA, everyone representing local government, are still very, very keen to see something in this space. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so we, as you've pointed out, we have consulted and a general power of competence or similar primary legislation is being looked at. One option would be the local democracy bill that's currently planned for year 2 of the next Parliament. But I recognise that that's quite far down the line, and given those timescales, we are looking at more immediate measures that could be introduced in secondary legislation in either maybe the current financial year or early in the next financial year to deliver greater empowerment for local authorities to innovate whilst we look at that primary legislation. So happy to come back to the committee with more detail of that. We have been talking to local government. We know they are keen to have some of those flexibilities. We've talked a lot during this session about revenue raising, and we recognise that actually some of the the commercial opportunities that local government operate in are things that potentially could be options for them to take forward within a framework. So work is ongoing. I don't know, Ellen, if you want to add anything to that.
I think we expect to produce the results of the analysis of the consultation and a government response in the very near future, and to kind of confirm what some more short-term options might be to take forward, which we're happy to write to the committee about that in greater detail. Expect to be able to offer some progress very shortly.
Okay. Thank you for that. And finally, I'm going to ask a question that didn't get a time to ask with in the previous panel, but I'll ask it here. And I kind of feel like I've been hearing it throughout the whole conversation, but I'd be interested to get a sense of the progress made on a monitoring and accountability framework, which was a commitment of the Verity House Agreement.
Do you want to answer? You've been closer to the detail.
Just waiting for the button to go live.
Yeah, so Ellen.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Very happy to say that we continue to make progress with our colleagues in local government and have had some conversations with the Accounts Commission and with other scrutiny bodies. The progress has been slower than we would have liked. There have been a number of competing priorities, but we do anticipate bringing something to conclusion this session.
Okay, great. Timescale?
We anticipate being able to bring something forward for ministers and leaders to consider early next year to conclude it before the end of this Parliament.
Great, good. Thanks very much for that. So that's been a really great conversation. Thanks so much for Cabinet Secretary for being here with your officials and helping us have a greater understanding as part of our pre-budget scrutiny. That concludes our public part of the meeting. So I'm now going to move into private. Thank you.